The end of days. This is Jonathan Cahn, and this is the Dragon's Prophecy Uncensored. And this is the next mystery, the end of days. What is the end of days? The words or the term is as ancient as the Torah, the very start of the Bible. In Hebrew, it reads the Acharit Hayamim. The Acharit Hayamim. The phrase can also be translated as the later days, or the last of days, or the latter days, the remnant of days, the latter end of the days, and the last days. The words refer not to the end of the world, but to the end of the age. They are the days leading up to and ushering in the coming of Messiah and the kingdom of God. One of the first times this term appears is when Moses is speaking to Israel, and it's in his last address. And he says, when you are in distress, Jewish people, Israel, and all these things come upon you in the end of days, when you turn to the Lord your God and obey his voice. When you, in the Aharit Hayamim, the word translated here as turn, when you turn to the Lord, is the word shuv. Shuv can also be translated as return. The end of days are going to be marked by return. It's going to witness the return of the Jewish people to their homeland, ultimately to God. The word in this passage that's rendered as distress, when you're in distress, is the Hebrew word sar. Sar can be translated also as tribulation, like tribulation period, adversity, affliction, sorrow. Biblical prophecy is consistent. It speaks of the end of days as a time of great tribulation for the nation of Israel, for the Jewish people, and for the world, for believers. A time of war, time of calamity, time of destruction, and return. The word sar can also be translated as enemy or adversary. So the end of days are going to be likewise marked by the empowerment of God's enemies, enemies of Israel, enemies of God, who wage war against God and the nation of Israel and God's people. The end of days will also be marked by another tsar, the enemy, the dragon. So it's no accident that the dragon plays a key role in the book of Revelation. The last days will be marked by evil and apostasy. When immorality will increase, the love of many will grow cold. Putting together the pieces, the end of days will be marked by return, adversity, evil, war, tribulation, war against God and Israel and against his people, or persecution, calamity, and the dragon. Imagine being a shepherd in the ancient Middle East. You don't have computers, you don't have cell phones, you don't have any of that. You have a shepherd staff. That's your technology. And maybe an olive press and other things. But you have the scriptures, though, and within them you have the prophecies of the end of days. If you only had that, the word of God, what could you actually know about the future? What would it tell you? It would tell you that in the future, you're going to have a world in which the Jewish people have returned from their global exile to their ancient land, and in which the nation of Israel is resurrected. It would tell you that in the future, the entire world, the focus will be fixed on Israel. It would tell you that Israel would be viewed by the nations as a source of conflict and controversy, and that wars would be waged concerning it. It would tell you that the world at that time is going to be marked by apostasy, a departure from God, from faith, and from what had long been accepted as morality. A world that advanced an anti-biblical morality, a world over which the shadow of destruction was looming. So with no technology, with nothing but a shepherd's staff, you could do what no scientist today could do, what no supercomputer can do, what no artificial intelligence could do. You could describe the modern world now before it's coming. In other words, if there's an age that corresponds with biblical prophecy and foretells of the end of days, the Acharit Hayamim, we're already there. It's no accident that October 7th, the worst day in the history of the Jewish state, embodied the central dynamics prophesied of the end of days. A resurrected Israel, and Israel at the center of global controversy, a campaign that sought to destroy it. October 7th was saturated with end-time markers. It was the day of the enemy's work, his power. The end times will be marked by many days of the enemy's works and powers. And so what took place on that day is going to give us a glimpse into the days to come, the end time tactics, plans, and strategies of the enemy. On October 7th, the enemy came against Israel with a massive onslaught designed to overwhelm it, all its resistance and hedges, its protection. That's the enemy's strategy in the end. As his influence increases in culture, he will seek to break down all resistance, all defense, by coming against the works and purposes of God and his people in a massive and overwhelming onslaught. As the operation that came against Israel bore the name flood, so in the end times the enemy will come upon the world as an overwhelming flood, a flood to come through overwhelm culture and government and media and schools and technology, indoctrination, propaganda, a flood of every way, including physical war, but cultural war. It's amazing how this opens up what's actually showing us really the future. Those who oppose his agenda, he'll seek to sweep away. October 7th reveals some other things. We saw it was marked by desecration. I've shared about this on the last video. So the last days are going to be marked by desecration, as we said. He will seek to defile and twist, invert the works of God. Just as he twisted the holy days of Israel, he'll seek to invert the image of God wherever it appears. The desecration of life, as we said, of marriage, of society, of men, women, children, all things. And as October 7th, we saw the imitation of God's appointed times with the devil's holidays. The end times will be marked by imitation, a false God, a false Messiah. And October 7th was the manifestation, remember, of the dragon's orgidzo, his rage, his fury. So the last days are going to be driven by the dragon's orgidzo, ruled by it, possessed by it, driven by it. It'll manifest in growing animosity toward the things of God in every realm of culture and life, and all-out war to destroy them, as the acts committed on that day were demonic, impelled by the dragon spirit. So at the end of the age, this spirit of the enemy will take possession of nations and governments. They'll be ruled by it, cultures transformed by it. That what they once knew as evil, they will practice, rejoice in, and celebrate. Under this onslaught, the pure, many of the pure will be defiled, the good condemned. October 7th, the blood of innocent was shed, so that will also be part as well. Could a prominent symbol in the war of Palestine against Israel, the Philistine, be connected to a vision in the book of Revelation? In Revelation 6, a scroll bound with 7 seals is opened. As each seal is removed, an apocalyptic event takes place on earth, connected to judgment on earth. The first 4 seals are linked to 4 horses and 4 riders. The 4 horsemen. Of the first horseman, this is of course the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. It's written, he who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. Thus, the first apocalyptic event is linked to conquest. Of the second horseman it's written, it was granted to the one who sat on it to take peace from the earth, that people should kill one another, and there was given to him a great sword. So the second apocalyptic event is connected to conflict and war. Of the third rider, it's written, he who sat on it had a pair of scales on his hand, and I heard a voice in the midst of the 4 living creatures saying, quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil or the wine. The third apocalyptic event is linked to hunger, want, or famine. And of the 4th horseman, it is written, and the name of him who sat on it was Death, and Hades followed with him. The 4th event is embodied by death. The 4 riders have become known as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. To them was given power to kill with a sword, with hunger, with death, by the beasts of the earth. Together they constitute an ominous image of coming judgment. The Jewish people, when they pray, the observant Jews, they have a talit, a prayer shawl. It's called the talit. It's supposed to be made, sometimes it's black and white, but it's supposed to be made of white cloth and framed with stripes that are supposed to be of blue. Do you know that the Israeli flag, officially adopted during the first Zionist Congress at the end of the 19th century, consisting of white cloth with a blue Star of David framed with 2 stripes of blue, it actually is linked to the Jewish prayer cloth. The flag of Israel is linked, modeled on the Jewish prayer cloth. Prayer, beautiful. Israel's national flag is really a prayer cloth, connected to prayer, worship, and God. The word Palestine has already become a lightning rod of anti-Israel hatred throughout the world. Is it possible that the issue of Palestine could actually be used to plant the seeds that will come to fruition in the apocalypse against Israel? The flag of Palestine was adopted by the PLO in 1964. Remember, we spoke about the birth of that with Yasser Arafat. Well, later Yasser Arafat became the head. It was based on an earlier flag representing Arab revolt. That flag was created in the last part of the First World War at the same time that the Balfour Declaration promising the Jewish people a homeland was birthed. Now, the flag of Palestine consists of a triangle, 3 stripes, and 4 colors, linked to 4 Arab dynasties. But beyond the dynasties of the 4 colors of the flag, they match up with something else that nobody intended. The first of the 4 horses of the apocalypse is called in Greek Hupos Lukos. The word Lukos comes from the Greek word for light. It's a light horse, or a white horse. I looked and behold, a white horse. The first color of the flag of Palestine is white. The second of the 4 horses is called in Greek Hupos Purhas. Purhas comes from the Greek word for fire. It means red, bright red. Another horse, fiery red, went out. The second color of the flag of Palestine is red. The third of the 4 horses is called in Greek Hupos Melos. The word Melos means black. I looked, and behold, a black horse. The third color of the flag of Palestine is black. The last of the four horses is called, in Greek, Hupos chloros. The word chloros, we get chlorine, chlorophyll. It can be translated as pale, but chloros actually means something other than pale. In fact, every other time in the New Testament that it appears, it's translated in a different way, this way. It's used to describe the color of grass. It means green. So I looked, and behold, a green horse. The last color of the flag of Palestine is green. The Palestinian flag, the flag that was created to nullify the nation of Israel, the flag that is waved around the world in rage against the nation of Israel to destroy Israel, just happens to bear the four colors of the four horses of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Not only that, but the nations of the world that fly these four colors in their flags are almost exclusively the same nations that have opposed or actively waged war against the Jewish nation, or that are prophesied to do so in the end. White, red, black, and green. The colors of Palestine, the colors of October 7th, and the colors of the apocalypse. Okay, some uncensored information, not in the book. And that is, there was a guy who helped with the Balfour Declaration that helped bring Israel back into the world. But remember the principle, what God uses for good, the enemy uses to change it, to overturn it. What God uses for Israel, like in the holy days, the enemy uses against Israel. So it's interesting because there was a guy who helped with the Balfour Declaration, which helped bring Israel into the world. He's credited as helping design the flag, which would become the flag of Palestine, the flag of Arab revolt back then, which is also linked to the colors of the apocalypse, which involves the nations attacking Israel. So amazing that how the one thing is always turned by the enemy, but then God takes the things of the enemy and turns them for good. All right, now, could the wave of hatred and rage that swept the world after October 7th and on October 7th give us a revelation into the end of days? In the book of Revelation, it says, I saw three unclean spirits like frogs coming out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. Now, most of what is revealed in Revelation 12 concerns the end of the age. It is then that the dragon, his war against the woman, reaches its peak. And though the war is manifested on earth, it's ultimately spiritual. According to Bible prophecy, it's going to engulf the entire world. The world is going to be pulled into this. So as that day approaches, we would expect to see eruptions of the dragon's orgidzo, his outbreaks of rage and hatred against the Jewish people and the nation of Israel. And we'd expect those eruptions and outbreaks to span the globe. Revelation 16 is what speaks about these unclean spirits like frogs emerging from the mouth of the dragon, and also from the false prophet and the beast, which we're going to get to. They go forth to the kings of the earth. The goal of the spirits is to draw the world into the dragon's will and into waging war against Israel. So can we see shadows of that day coming and of that spiritual process? In the wake of October 7th, there were statements of sympathy from some world leaders, but the most striking response to the calamity wasn't compassion or sympathy, but celebration. The dragon's orgidzo that had possessed the invaders of October 7th would now break out beyond the borders of Philistia, the ancient Philistines, and explode across the world. The celebrations and demonstrations that originated with the Palestinians now exploded across the Islamic world, from Egypt to Iraq, Lebanon to Iran. But they wouldn't stop there. They'd break out across Europe, from Germany to the United Kingdom, England. They would even break out in the most pro-Israel of world powers, America. You know, it's not normal. It's not normal. A response to atrocity and mass murder of civilians, men, women, and children, fathers, mothers, and children, that's not normal. It's not normal that those who commit atrocity and murder innocent civilians should be hailed as heroes. But they were. See, the thing is, the victims were not just any people. They were the Jews. So the normal laws don't apply, nor do the guardrails of rational thought. The phenomenon was not normal. It wasn't natural. It was driven by an entity whose nature is not natural and not normal. So why did this happen? See, the dragon's nature, a dragon is a predator, as we saw. For many predators, the scent of blood triggers them to hunt down and devour their prey. In some species, the scent of blood sends them into killing frenzies, blood frenzies. In the wake of October 7th, it was as if the killing of the Jewish people had triggered a blood frenzy in the spiritual realm, in the demonic realm. Eruptions of rage and celebrations of murder throughout the world, before there was even a war, just when the Jewish people were killed and taken away. It was not even that the rage was, it wasn't rooted in anything Israel did. It was simply that Jewish blood was spilled The predator of Revelation 12, the dragon, pursues the woman, hunts down the woman. In the wake of October 7th, the world was given a glimpse of that hunt as the spirit of the dragon triggered the stalking of the woman's children, Israel. Not only in Israel, but around the world. In Western cities, Orthodox Jews were pursued, attacked on the streets. Jewish people were hiding their Stars of David under their shirts, their yarmulkes under baseball caps. In New York City, Jewish students had to be locked inside their school library in order to save them from violence of an anti-Israel mob. In the 2 months following October 7th, anti-Jewish hate crimes multiplied nearly 5 times of what it had been a year before. And all across the world, the children of Israel were attacked, vilified, pursued, terrorized, abused. And the faces of Israelis, the Israelis being held hostage by Hamas, were actually ripped down from the walls on which they were posted or defaced. And in the world of wokeness, where any perceived microaggression or offended sensibility, the response is condemnation, retribution, firing of people, and public penance. The murder of Jewish people was met with nothing, silence or applause and chants. It was then that Jewish people around the world began realizing that the new left that had trumpeted the virtues of tolerance and inclusion and equity was actually filled with a virulent strain of Jew hatred. Groups dedicated to countering the mistreatment of women, including those operating inside the United Nations, when it came to the raping and murdering of Israeli women, they didn't say anything. Organizations that were dedicated to the protecting of children around the world found that when it came to the killing of Jewish children, they had nothing to say. An American chapter of Black Lives Matter celebrated October 7th by posting images of Hamas gunmen parading into the land of Israel with machine guns to slaughter Israeli villagers. The images depicted them as heroes. And the demonstrations throughout the world featured Nazi-style anti-Semitic caricatures, chants of "Gas the Jews," and the waving of swastikas. October 7th was not the first explosion of the dragon's rage against the Jewish people since Israel's rebirth, and it would not be the last, but it was unique in its scope, its scale, global, against the Jewish people. It served as a vessel through which the dragon's fury exploded across the world. It's a precursor to the going forth of the unclean spirits of Revelation that will likewise take hold of the earth. See, what happened, this virus, remember we saw how God spoke regarding the Philistines back then, and he spoke because you've nurtured this hatred, the ancient hatred, vengeance, hatred. And we saw how this ancient hatred has taken possession of the people who are now called the Philistines. But now this virus has infected the world. The Philistine virus has affected the world. The ancient Philistines celebrated Jewish calamity and bloodshed in the streets of Philistia. And so again, on October 7th, in the modern-day streets of Philistia. But now, those same celebrations, these dark celebrations of the Philistines, now spread across the world. They could now be seen on the streets of London, in the courts of Harvard University. In televised reports of cable news channels, the seeds of ancient Philistia were being sown into the nations. Its deep hatred of Israel was becoming a central part of global culture. The world was increasingly taking on the attributes and nature of Israel's ancient enemies. I write in the book, the world was becoming a global Philistia. Now, could one of the most controversial of end-time prophecies be connected to the events of October 7th? In the book of Ezekiel is a unique prophecy that's evoked much controversy and attention among those who study the end times. Many believe it foretells the next great prophetic event. The prophecy appears in Ezekiel 38 and 39. The language includes imagery of swords and shields, and it's believed that these correspond to their modern counterparts. It's the only language that they could have spoken of the prophet in his age. But there are many other elements of the prophecy that places it clearly, firmly at the end of the age. First, there's no evidence it was ever fulfilled in ancient times, and it concerns Israel until the only other age could be now, has to be now. Further, it concerns nations that don't border the land of Israel, several of which are real far away. One is 1,500 miles away. For that reason, there are Bible scholars in the past said, well, it can't be taken literally because that could never happen. Back then, it could never happen, but it could happen now. Nations don't have to be near to be part of an invasion. It's more possible now than any other time. And then the prophecy itself says, after many days you will be visited. In the last days, the latter years, you'll come into the land of those brought back from the sword and gathered from many nations on the mountains of Israel, which long had been desolate. They were brought out of the nations. They dwell there safely now. So the prophecy is for many days, a biblical way of speaking of ages, appointed for the last days. There it is. And the land of Israel will be one that had been brought back from many nations. That's only been now. gathered from many peoples from the land which had been long desolate. That's only now. More true now than any other time. So what's the prophecy foretell? It speaks of a mass invasion of nations who will say, quote, I will go up against a land of unwalled villages. I will go to a peaceful people who dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls, unwalled. Well, actually, that's true now. It wasn't true back then, because back then you had walls around the cities. But now you don't. It will overwhelm the land. And then God will intervene and bring judgment on the invaders. The event appears to serve as a prelude to the conflict foretold in Revelation. But as I shared in the uncensored parts, it's not Armageddon. It's before that. October 7th, now listen, was the first mass invasion of Israel in half a century. If the nations in Ezekiel's prophecy are to launch a future mass invasion, is it possible that they could actually in some way be connected to what happened on October 7th? And that October 7th, therefore, is a precursor of what will happen in Ezekiel 38 and 39. Which nations? Their names are, as given in the prophecy, are Gog, Magog, Meshech, Tubal, Paras, Cush, Put, Gomer, and Togarmah. The word Rosh also appears as well, but we're not sure that can also be the Hebrew word for head of nation. So we can't take that, be dogmatic, that's a nation. But now I'm going to leave out the question for now about the possibility and controversy over a connection to modern day Russia. And I'm actually going to speak on that in the uncensored part. I didn't speak about it in the book. We're going to begin identifying the ancient prophesied invaders. Cush. Who is Cush? The Cushites were an ancient people. They lived on the northeast coast of Africa by the Red Sea. Much of their history was linked to Egypt. They would attack each other. The word is often translated as Ethiopia in the Bible, but people then think it's modern Ethiopia. No, modern Ethiopia is really something called Abyssinia. But the biblical Ethiopia, or Cush, answers to the land that is now called Sudan. So if Sudan is going to be part of a coming invasion of Israel, could it have played a part in the invasion of Israel on October 7th? The answer is yes. Sudan, the Cush of Ezekiel, actually played a central part in the invasion of October 7th. Sudan served as a channel to supply Hamas with a massive weaponry, amounts that would be used against Israel on October 7th. This is from a news article on the modern day Cush. Sudan had allowed Hamas to turn its territory into a major smuggling route for weapons into the Gaza Strip. Hamas was able to wreak havoc on Israel because, here's another thing from an article, because terrorist organizations smuggled weapons to Hamas overland through the Sinai via Sudan, as well as by sea. Here's another quote from an article. Sinai-based Bedouin smugglers brought items to Gaza via Sudan. Sudan's role in arming Hamas was so great that Israel publicly exposed it. I mean, repeatedly. Sudan would also enable Hamas to get millions of dollars in funding to support its war and invasion against Israel. And so even though a Sudanese coup had limited Hamas support in that land, a coup that could be reversed at any time, the nation prophesied to invade Israel in the future days had played a major role in helping to make October 7th possible. On October 7th, Cush invaded Israel by proxy. Now, who is Put in the prophecy? Well, the Neo-Babylonians called the land of Put, Puta. The Persians called it Putaya. In the book of Nahum, they are linked to the Lubim people. The collective witness of ancient writings place Put on the North African coast to the west of Egypt. So what nation in the modern world makes up the land that corresponds with the ancient nation of Put? The correspondence may include Algeria and Tunisia, but it is most centrally identified with one nation above all. It bears the same name that was connected to Put in ancient times. The ancient Jewish historian Josephus writes of a river in North Africa called Put and notes that its name was changed to Libyos, as in Libya. Put corresponds with modern Libya. So if then Libya is to play a part in the coming invasion of Israel, could it actually have played a part in the invasion of Israel on October 7th, a precursor? The answer is yes. Libya, the biblical Put, served as one of the main and the most important suppliers of weapons to Hamas in Gaza. From a news article on the Libyan connection to Hamas, Libyan militias are helping armed Palestinian groups Hamas circumvent Israel's blockade of the Gaza Strip. From another article, Israel officials warned that Hamas was working with Libyan weapons smugglers. Egyptian security forces confiscated 138 Grad rockets brought in from Libya, destined for Gaza. And this, all the missiles you might see in Gaza includes transfers by sea and apparent deliveries from Libya. Libya made possible the thousands of rockets that rained down on Israel on that day. And so both of these prophesied invaders of Israel, Cush, Sudan, Put, Libya, played a critical role in the invasion of Israel on October of 23. Now, who then are Gog, Magog, Meshech, Tubal, even Togarmah? From the writings of ancient historians and chroniclers, we know they inhabited the land known as Anatolia. The names of Gomer and Togarmah are also identified as having dwelt in that same place. The region was a crossroad of culture and populations and migrations, and so it's possible that other nations could be included, but the strongest clues we have are that they were ancient inhabitants of Anatolia, known as Asia Minor. What nation today corresponds with Asia Minor? Can only be Turkey. Could Turkey have played a part in the October 7th invasion? The answer is yes, and in a big way. Turkey was critical in providing the funds that Hamas needed to arm itself and invade Israel. This is from a New York Times article exposing the financial network that was funding Hamas, a network that traced back to Turkey. It says this: though the investment portfolio spanned many countries, Turkey was key. The support of Turkey for Hamas was so central that the U.S. Treasury Department pressed the Turkish government to stop sheltering funds earmarked for the terrorist group Hamas. Turkey was even behind the Libyan operation of transporting arms to Hamas. Here are some headlines. Turkish-backed group in Libya smuggling arms to Hamas. So Turkey, or Gog, Magog, Meshech, Tubal, worked with Libya Put to attack and foster an invasion on Israel. There's only one more invader, and again, Russia's another story, but one more invader specifically mentioned in Ezekiel's prophecy. It's called in Hebrew Paras. As to its identity, there's no question at all. There's no interpretation. Doesn't matter. Paras would play a key role in ancient history of the Jewish people, and very different from modern times, because it was actually positive. I'm going to share some things about Persia that I didn't share in the book. Persia in the Bible has such a major role. In the Bible, Cyrus overtook Babylon and let the Jews go back to Israel. And there's the Abrahamic covenant. Whatever you do to Israel is going to be done to you. So Persia allowed the Jews to go back and continue as a nation, not as great as they had been before, but a diminished or smaller version, but still. So what did God do? He allowed Persia to continue on as a nation, not as the great Persian Empire, but smaller versions. It's amazing. Persia has continued on, unlike many other powers. Like, it can be identified throughout the ages. It's the same nation. In the time of Messiah, from the Persians came the Magi. They were priests in Persia. And as far as the darker side of Persia is Haman or Haman. It may be the first attempt at full genocide of a people when he tried to destroy the Jewish people in the book of Esther. Persia was Persia into the 20th century. Only in the 1930s did it change its name, and the new name of Persia was Iran. Iran. Remember what Hitler used to glorify. The Nazis glorified the Aryan people. Said, they were supposed to be the Aryans, the white Aryan thing. You know what Aryan means? Iran. It comes from Iran. Iran was the Aryan people. In the 1930s, days of Hitler, they changed their name to Iran, which is basically linked to the word Aryan. Could Iran have played a part in the October 7th invasion of Israel? The answer is yes, and in many ways more than any other nation. Iran's part in sponsoring arming Hamas, you cannot overstate it. In many ways, it was the power behind it all, beyond October 7th. The following is from an article, or a few articles, on October 7th and Iran. Listen, Hamas relied principally on Iran to fund its military wing. Here's another. U.S. officials assert that Iran gives funds, weapons, and training to Hamas. Another. Hamas fights with a patchwork of weapons built by Iran. Iran has since supplied material and know-how for Hamas to build a sizable rocket arsenal with more than 10,000 rockets and mortar shells fired in the current conflict. Here's another. Iranian sponsorship played a major role in enabling Hamas to start last month's fighting in Gaza. So without Iran, the Paras that's prophesied in Ezekiel 38, the invasion of October 7th could never have taken place. What happens if we take such reports and articles and headlines? I did an experiment. I just took them and I replaced them with their modern names. What the article says, simply their ancient names. This is what happens. Listen. Gog-backed groups in Put smuggling arms to Hamas. Israel repeatedly accused Paras, Persia, of transshipping weapons to Hamas via Cush. Paras and Hezbollah have smuggled weapons to Hamas overland through Sinai via Cush and Put. Militias of Put, funded by Paras, Persia, and Gog, Meshech, and Tubal, are helping armed Philistine group Hamas circumvent Israel's blockade of Philistia. what happens is that the words of the news stories, news articles, begin morphing into the likeness of the ancient prophecy of Ezekiel 38 and 39. When Ezekiel's prophecy was first put down on parchment, the majority of the peoples and nations it named not only were not at war with Israel, but had little, if anything at all, to do with Israel. And for ages, the prophecy puzzled Bible commentators who studied it. And yet 2,500 years later, against all odds, all of the peoples or nations spoken of in Ezekiel's prophecy have become and have actively functioned as enemies of the Jewish state of Israel. The same nations prophesied of in Ezekiel to wage war against a resurrected Israel have, as of October 7, 2023, through their proxies, waged war against that very nation. The same nation that Ezekiel foretold would all be part of the invasion of Israel, have now all had a part in the invading of Israel. Now the prophecy's fulfillment is still ahead. And the road that leads to that fulfillment may be filled with turns and twists and reversals and departures. And the timing is in God's hands. But, listen, on October 7th, 2023, for the first time ever, the nations identified or cited in Ezekiel's prophecy to be involved in a future mass invasion of Israel were all involved in a mass invasion of Israel. The signs of October 7th would indicate we are closer to that day, the day of the prophecy's fulfillment, than we might have imagined. How was Hamas able to do what it did with all those weapons and rockets? How? It happened because of the shadow powers that funded and armed it, and for the purpose of waging war against Israel. And of all the nations and powers that could have been those shadow powers, just happened to be the same as foretold by Ezekiel in that prophecy. Without them, Hamas never could have happened. Without them, October 7th could never have happened. It was made possible. Listen, October 7th was made possible by the nations cited in Ezekiel 38 and 39, 2,500 years before: Gog, Magog, Meshech, Tubal, Gomer, Togarmah, Cush, Put, and Persia. Now something else. Ezekiel's prophecy describes the invasion of Israel this way. It says, you will ascend, you will come like a storm on the land, you and all your troops, many people with you. The invasion is going to come upon the land as a storm, suddenly, ferociously. So the invasion of October 7th came that way. It was like a foreshadow, suddenly, massively, ferociously. But it wasn't just that the invasion shared attributes of coming like a storm. The official name of the invasion, remember what it was? That it was called by Hamas, Tufan, Operation Tufan, meaning flood. But that same word has an alternate translation. It can also be rendered as storm. Storm. So according to this translation, the invasion bore the same name as the word given in Ezekiel's prophecy. The actual, he says, you will come like a storm. It could be called Operation Storm. The actual Hebrew word for storm in Ezekiel's prophecy, the Hebrew word is shoah. Interesting, because shoah can be storm or devastation, destruction, sudden catastrophe. Why is that interesting? Because the worst day in Jewish history since the Holocaust, October 7th, was likened to the Holocaust. But in Hebrew, the Holocaust is not called the Holocaust. It's called the shoah, the same word in Ezekiel's prophecy of the invasion, naming these nations that all had a part in it. So the Arabic code name for October 7th matched the Hebrew name for the Holocaust, and for the first time ever, the nations that were prophesied in Ezekiel 38 and 39 came upon the land of Israel as a storm, took part, helped an attack on Israel that had a code name that could be translated as storm. That invasion was named Tufan. Also happened to match the Greek word that appears in Revelation to speak of the dragon's flood against the woman, Potamon, while at the same time matching the Hebrew word given to the name of the dragon's deadliest campaign ever launched against the Jewish people, the Holocaust, the Shoah. We're going to open up the mystery of the Sar Paras. In Revelation 12, it says a war broke out in heaven. A war breaks out in the heavenly realms. One side, you got angelic forces. On the other side, the dragon, his angels. One of the realities of the spiritual realm is warfare. What we're about to see concerns that war and how it actually converged with world events. And to uncover it, we have to go back to the court of an ancient pagan king. The prophet Daniel, who was at that court, was taken from Israel captive to Babylon. And there, in the royal court, he receives prophecies from God concerning the end of days. He's standing by the Tigris River. It says he saw a man. It's an angel. And it says here, he has a prophetic revelation for Daniel. It says, the angel says, don't fear, Daniel. From the first day that you set your heart to understand and humble yourself before God, your words have been heard. And I have come because of your words. But the Sar Paras, the Sar Mahut Paras, withstood me for 21 days. So the angel is telling Daniel that he would have been there earlier, but he was prevented from doing so by another entity. The entity is called in Hebrew the Sar Mahut Paras. The word Sar could be translated prince, head, chief, ruler, captain, lord, master. The word malchut means kingdom of, and the word paras, as it appears also in Ezekiel 38, means Persia. Persia at that time was at the height of its power, having just established its empire across the Middle Eastern world. What kind of entity was the Tsar Paras? It had battled against an angel. That makes it a spiritual entity, and to go against an angel means you're not of God, you're evil. An angel of darkness, a demon, a demonic entity called the Tsar Paras. Why did it seek to stop the angel sent to Daniel? Well, the angel had a mission. It says, I've come to make you understand what will happen to your people, Israel. In the last days, the vision refers to many days yet to come. The Tsar Paras is trying to stop the transmitting of a revelation concerning God's purposes for Israel in the last days. The revelation concerns the city of Jerusalem, the restored temple of Jerusalem, the book of Revelation, the Antichrist, the end of the age, the return of Messiah. It was this that the demonic entity is trying to stop. At the time of the prophecy, most Jewish people were in exile. They weren't even in the land. The prophecy requires them coming back to the land, back to Jerusalem, rebuilding the temple. And so upon leaving, the angel goes back into the battle with the entities. The Tsar Paras, therefore, wars against the purposes of God. It seeks to stop them before they happen. Specifically, it wars against the purpose of God concerning Israel, and more specifically, against God's purposes for Israel in the last days. This is a unique demonic entity that it's also linked to one particular nation, Persia. Tsar Paras could be translated as the Prince of Persia, the Persian Lord, the Master of Persia, but Persia became Iran, so it could be translated as the ruler of Iran, the Master of Iran, the Iranian Lord. So it seeks to control the nation of Persia, Iran, to lead it, drive it, use it as an instrument. See, spirits don't die. So the Tsar Paras didn't perish in ancient times, still exist. And since it specifically wars against the nation of Israel and God's end time purposes for that nation, what would we expect to happen with the return of Israel to the modern world and the Jewish people to Jerusalem? We'd expect it would trigger or activate the Tsar Paras in his ancient war. Okay, some uncensored information. I mentioned that there's a link between Iran and Aryan, the word that Hitler was all wrapped up in, but also there's a lot of influence in Iran at that time by Hitler and the Nazis at that time, as it was in the Arab world. But also, most people don't realize when Israel was resurrected, Iran was not an enemy. In fact, it was the second Muslim nation to recognize it. And you see, the reason is there's Arabs and there's Iran. Iran is not made up of Arabs. And so it's Shiite, not Sunni. And so it's kind of on the edge. So therefore, they were actually friendly to Israel. Under the Shah of Iran, Shah Reza Pahlavi, Iran and Israel had friendly relations. Actually, after the 6-Day War, Iran provided Israel with oil and actually worked together. They worked together militarily. They worked on missiles together. But the prophecy says in the end, Iran, Paras, will be the enemy of Israel. So something had to happen. I remember, it's also not in the book, I went to my first prophecy event before I knew God. It was a film on this prophecy, Ezekiel. Someone stood up and said, Iran is never going to go against Israel. Iran is an ally of Israel. It's a strong ally of Israel. Yet, within just a few years of that meeting, it happened. It was called the Iranian Revolution. In the late 1970s, the Shah was overthrown. A new and radical Iran was unleashed on the world. The Tsar Paras, as it seeks to stop the end-time purposes of God concerning Israel. So this new Iran became obsessed with Israel. It's not an accident. And this is the reason they'll never tell you. It's spiritual. It established itself as Israel's nemesis. In fact, Israel considers it its arch enemy. It would engage in a campaign of opposing Israel, warring against Israel, ultimately seeking Israel's destruction. As demonic spirits use others as their agents, proxies, so the Tsar Paras-driven Iran would also use others as their instruments and proxies. And as demonic spirits use others to terrorize, so the radical Iran would now become a terror state sponsoring terrorism around the world. It would subsidize and facilitate terrorism, radicalism, anti-Israel hatred all around the Middle East, in Iran, in Lebanon, Bahrain, Yemen, Pakistan, Syria. It would train, support terrorist organizations against Israel to wage war. Hezbollah, Hamas. It would reach into Gaza, Hamas. It would be the chief sponsor of Hamas. So behind the Hamas was Iran. Behind Iran was the Tsar Paras. Behind the smuggling of arms to kill Israelis was a demonic, ancient Persian spirit. It was the Tsar Paras that caused the rockets to rain down upon the Israelis. And in the madness of those who invaded Israel on October 7th was the madness of the demonic spirit, the Tsar Paras. Demonic spirits seek death and destruction. And so Iran has sought death and destruction. Iran became a threat to the world order, became obsessed with attaining nuclear capabilities to this day, though it could strike other nations, particularly Israel. So there are massive efforts by the nations to try to control Iran. But the problem was they thought they were dealing with a nation. No, they were dealing with a spirit. Iran had become a unique power in the world, just as the entity that possessed it was a unique power among the spirits. The angel sent to give Daniel the prophecy was not alone. There was another angel helping him in his fight against the demonic entity. He said, and behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me. Michael is called a chief prince. The same word is, the word is Tsar. The great prince, the great Tsar, who stands for your people, stands for the children of your people. So he's also a Tsar. So you got the Tsar Paras. Now you have a special entity linked to Israel, the Tsar Yisrael, whose name is Michael, or we call him Michael. So Michael is especially connected to Israel. He fights for Israel. He's their prince. He's their general. He's their Tsar. So behind Iran is the Tsar Paras. The prince of Persia. Behind Israel is the Tsar Yisrael, Michael. So what would we expect of these two nations in the last days? If these two entities stand for the two nations and they're battling each other in the spiritual realm, what would we expect? We expect these two nations would become mortal enemies. And that's exactly what happened, Israel and Iran. That's why. Behind the earthly realm is the realm of spiritual principalities. And behind the conflict of Israel and Iran is the conflict of two of these entities, each one identified thousands of years earlier, waging war in the angelic realm, Michael and the dragon. Now it's interesting because the appearance of Michael in Scripture are rare. Outside of Daniel, his most prominent appearance is in the book of Revelation, and it occurs in the vision of the dragon's prophecy of Revelation 12. And war broke out in heaven, it says, and Michael and his angels fought the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought. So Michael wars against the Tsar Paras in Daniel, and in Revelation against the dragon. So the dragon and the Tsar Paras are on the same side. They're the same side of the same war. They're of the same army. The Tsar Paras is one of the dragon's angels. Each will wage war against Israel and the Jewish people in the last days. Each waged war against Israel on October 7th. And those who actually carried out the invasion, agents of Hamas, were serving in the same army as the Tsar Paras and the dragon and his angels. And yet there was more to the mystery. It would continue to unfold and explode on the world stage. At one point, it would even lead to the possibility of regional and world war. And it would happen while I was in the midst of writing the very pages about these prophecies. And so I actually have in the book 2 chapters that weren't in the book when I was writing it, but because it was happening while I was writing it, then I wrote that. And that we're going to look at what that is in now as we come up. I began writing the chapter on Ezekiel's prophecy of the invasion and the end times. As I did, one of the most significant events in line with this prophecy that had never taken place before, and then it did, soon after I was writing this. See, world events were following the book. When I was writing about the frogs, the spirits of anti-Israel hatred throughout the world, came an explosion of anti-Israel hatred throughout the world. As I'm writing of Ezekiel 38, an invasion comes with Israel and Iran, which we'll get to. I keep rewriting. There's a general named Zahedi. He was the Iranian general in command of the Quds force in Syria and Lebanon. He was a figure of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard. The United States designated both groups as terrorist organizations. He was critical, this guy, in supporting anti-Israel forces in the region, like Hezbollah. In the wake of October 7th, Hezbollah began launching missiles into Israel. It forced Israel to evacuate its north. An all-out war between Israel and Hezbollah became a very real possibility. It made it especially dangerous. And so the thing is, Zahedi was a key part behind it. Israel knew it. It would lead to a chain of events that would bring the Middle East to the brink of war and even the possibility of world war, all overflowing from October 7th. On April 1st, 2024, the Israeli Air Force struck an annex building of the Iranian consulate in Syria. Zahedi was in there conducting a meeting, and he was struck down. The Iranian government condemned it, vowed retaliation. The Israeli-Iranian conflict was about to enter a totally new, dangerous realm. 2 days after his death, the Iranian Coalition Council of the Islamic Revolutionary Forces, that was affiliated with the Ayatollah Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader, sent forth a communication praising Zahedi that he played a key part in the planning and execution of October 7th, of the attack on Israel, Hamas, praising him for that. For over a week, the world watched on edge for what Iran was going to do toward Israel, fearing it was going to set off a regional war, if not something bigger. On April 13th, it happened. Iran, together with the Islamic resistance in Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, launched over 120 ballistic missiles, 170 drones, and over 30 cruise missiles into the land of Israel. The largest missile attack ever launched by Iran and the largest drone strike in military history. It was intended to overwhelm Israel's defensive capabilities. The attack, it was a watershed moment. Up to that date, Iran had only come against Israel indirectly with proxies, but this is the first time it ever launched a direct attack With Israel allied with America in the West and Iran with Russia and China, the danger was that it could set off a world war. And it was all coming from October 7th. Now, the Dragon's Operation Flood had brought the world to the brink of calamity now. Israel, with its allies, shot down an estimated 99% of the missiles. Less than 1 week later, Israel responded. It chose to do so in a very restrained strike on varied Iranian, Syrian, and Iraqi military sites to demonstrate it was capable, but also of de-escalating the situation. The immediate crisis de-escalated, but a formerly unbreached line was now broken. Iran had attacked the land of Israel, and Israel had attacked the land of Iran. The Middle East was now in dangerous, uncharted territory. It was a historic watershed moment. And more than that, it was a prophetic milestone. Ezekiel foretold that in the last days, Persia or Iran would launch or be part of an attack against Israel that had been gathered from the nations. Well, that had never happened before, directly. And when I began writing this, it had never happened. When I began writing this chapter, it never happened. But on April 13th, 2024, for the first time ever, Persia, Iran launched a direct attack on the resurrected nation of Israel. It wasn't yet the fulfillment, but a prophetic line was crossed. First time. October 7th was the first time that virtually every identifiable people or nation in Ezekiel's prophecy had played a part in the invasion of Israel. April 13th, the first time that any one of those prophesied nations had actually launched an attack on Israel. The war of Michael and his angels against the dragon and takes place in the heavens, in heaven. The word translated as heaven in that passage in the Greek is Oranos. Oranos primarily means the sky. The heavens is the place of spiritual warfare, is represented in the physical realm by the sky. The war of Iran and Israel took place in the Oranos, in the sky, in the heavens, above each land. That 99% of the missiles fired into Israel were struck down, that was seen as a miracle. But the one who fights in the heavenlies on behalf of Israel is the Sar Yisrael, Michael. Is it possible that the miracle of Israel's protection in the heavenly realm, or in the sky, involved more than high-tech defense systems? Could it have involved a spiritual entity entrusted with Israel's protection and who wars in the heavenly places? Iran's attack on Israel centered on General Zahedi. General Zahedi is specialized on radicalizing, on empowering forces to go against Israel. He was an instrument of the Sar Paras. Interesting thing, because the word Sar, as in Sar Paras, can also be translated as general. General Zahedi, general. And Sar Paras, Sar is it's Sar of Persia. The general of Persia can be translated as the Iranian general. So the whole Middle East was brought to the brink of war, or to war, by an Iranian general, which can be translated as Sar Paras, and that could have brought the world to war. It's amazing. So it shouldn't be surprising that Israel struck down one who in Iran would be translated as the Sar Paras, or that all hell would break loose because of it. But there was another player even more central in Israel's and Iran's war, and would touch on an ancient covenant that would end up destroying him. He was the power behind General Zahedi. He was the one who presided over the arming and the strengthening of Hamas leading up to October 7th. His name was Ebrahim Raisi. Raisi was the president of Iran under Ayatollah Khamenei. He was even more critical than General Zahedi as an agent of chaos in the region and in the leading of proxies and factions to attack Israel, in arming them. He too was an instrument of the Sar Paras, and the Sar Paras is the entity bent on death. Raisi was infamous among his own people as a minister of death. They called him the Butcher of Tehran. He was responsible for the brutal repression of Iranian dissidents. He was a judge in the Iranian Death Commission in the revolution. He was accused of sentencing thousands of innocent people without trial to their death. He was cited for committing crimes against humanity. And he was the president of Iran when Iran launched its missile attack on the land of Israel. The word Sar can also be translated as chief or ruler or leader. So Sar Paras can be translated as ruler of Iran, or the leader or the Iranian leader. Under the Ayatollah, Raisi was the ruler and leader of Iran. But there was more. Raisi is a shortened form of a longer surname. It's a Persian word based on an Arabic title. You see, Sar is the Hebrew word that means chief or ruler. You know what Raisi means? Chief or ruler. It corresponds with the name Sar. And since he was a Persian ruler, he was a Sar Paras. Again, he was used by this entity. Raisi was at the height of his powers, and he was believed by many to be the successor to the Ayatollah, but it wasn't to be. On May 19, 2024, the helicopter in which he was flying over Iran's East Azerbaijan province crashed into a mountain. One of the world's most powerful rulers was no more, just like that. Well, what about Raisi's first name? Ebrahim. Ebrahim is the Persian form of Abraham. Abraham is the father of the Jewish people, the grandfather of Israel, from whom the Jewish nation gets its name. So Raisi was named after the father of the nation that he was warring to destroy. Abraham was given the promise that his children would inherit the land of God. Racy bears the name of the man who received that promise, and he armed people to remove the children of Abraham from the land that God gave him. The name Abraham or Ebrahim also points back to the man with whom God made a unique covenant, the Abrahamic covenant. It says this: I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you. In other words, those who bless the children of Abraham, the Jewish people, nation of Israel, will be blessed. Those who curse them will be cursed. It also implies reciprocity, that what you do to Israel, good or evil, will come back to you. So it's a word of encouragement for those who love the Jewish people. It's a word of warning for the anti-Semites around the world. Racy had cursed the nation of Israel. He did more than that. He waged war against them. He was unique. He was the only president in Iran's history to actually launch an attack against the nation of Israel, to send missiles into the land of Israel. You know, it's written in Zechariah that those who touch Israel are touching the apple of God's eye. In other words, to touch Israel is to touch the eye of God. Racy oversaw the firing of missiles into Israel on April 13th. He touched the eye of God. 1 month and 6 days later, he was dead. In his death was the working of reciprocity. Racy had sought to bring death and destruction to Israel, and so death and destruction came to him. He sought to bring destruction through the skies, so destruction came to him through the skies. He had sent airborne objects into the skies of Israel to bring destruction upon their crashing in the land, so it was an airborne object that carried him and brought destruction to him upon its crashing into the land. As he had sought to do to Israel, it was done to him. And he did more than that. Just a few days after he sent the missiles into Israel, and Israel responded with restraint, Racy sealed his actions and his fate. Soon after Israel, de-escalated it, Racy issued a public statement. It was a threat. He said that if Israel took any future action against Iran, Israel would very possibly be annihilated. There'd be nothing left of it. The statement made headlines around the world. Here are some headlines. Iranian president threatens Israel's annihilation. Nothing will be left of Israel. Racy was threatening the Jewish state with total destruction that would come through Iran under his leading. In other words, he would be the one to destroy Israel. It was reportedly the last public statement he would ever make. Not only had he attacked Israel, he had sealed his action with a curse and a threat of total destruction. To threaten and plan for the destruction of Israel is a most dangerous thing. 1 month later, Israel was still there. Racy was not. He was struck down, and there was nothing left of his life. We've seen the connection of the Greek Oranos between the heavens of the spiritual realm and the warfare of the Sar Paras and the Sar Yisrael and the skies above the earth, which is what the word means. Racy sent death through the Oranos, through the heavens of Israel, the sky. Now death would come to him through the Oranos of Iran, the skies of Iran. There were 3 helicopters flying in a convoy. 2 made it, only 1 didn't. Michael is the Sar Yisrael, the angelic entity in charge of protecting Israel. That charge would include preventing threats of destruction from being fulfilled. He fights in the Oranos, the heavenlies. There was no human hand believed to be involved in that crash. Is it possible that there was another hand, the hand of the Sar Yisrael? In Ezekiel's prophecy of Israel's end-time invasion, God gives this word to the invaders. He says, I will bring you against the mountains. You shall fall upon the mountains. Those who attack Israel will be brought to judgment on the mountains. Racy was the first leader cited in that prophecy of a nation cited to actually launch an attack on Israel. What was his fate? He was brought to the mountains. He was brought against the mountains. He fell on the mountains, just as it said he would literally fall on the mountains. Now, when the prophecy comes to its fulfillment, the invaders will fall on the mountains of Israel. But as Iran's attack was a shadow of that day, Racy's fall could be taken as a shadow of the fall to come. And you know what? The first kingdom or power to come against Israel was Egypt. The day that broke the power of Egypt, or its Pharaoh, was Passover. Passover commemorates the deliverance of Israel from the power of the Pharaoh and evil ruler. Racy was the leader of a modern nation that tried to destroy Israel, wanted to, and he threatened to annihilate Israel. Could that be significant when he did it? He did it on April 23rd, 2024. He issued his threat on Passover. An evil ruler threatened to destroy Israel on the day that God gave victory to an evil ruler who wanted to destroy Israel. Israel had been threatened with annihilation. Now Racy was destroyed. But one other thing, what Racy did on that Passover was more than a threat. He was threatening the annihilation of God's eternal nation, to destroy the work of God, the promise of God, the purposes of God, the kingdom of God. It was an act of blasphemy. The fact that he committed it on a Hebrew holy day was even more, a double blasphemy. So the fact that he had done so after actually attempting to bring destruction on the land, striking God's, or trying to strike God's eye, that's all the more. He had no idea what he was invoking. Every Sabbath day, there is once a week, there's an appointed word, appointed from ages past, to be read. Racy was killed on the day after the Sabbath. The day before he died, there was an appointed scripture read throughout Israel, chanted by the Jewish people in Israel around the world. What was it? Book of Leviticus. It speaks of the holy days on which Racy committed blasphemy, but then it concludes with a unique account. It speaks of a man who had committed blasphemy against God. Racy had committed blasphemy, and He had struck the land of Israel. He had followed it with that word, that threat of annihilation. And the scripture that was read just before it happened says, whoever blasphemes the name of the Lord shall surely be put to death. This is the law of blasphemy. And it goes on to say it's not just to the Jewish people, it concerns the stranger as well. Raci blasphemed the name of God. The very last words of that scripture describes that the man who committed the blasphemy was taken outside the camp and put to death. Raci would be taken outside the camp of his people to the outskirts of Iran. There he who had blasphemed the Lord was put to death, and he was put to death against the mountains. Raci was at the pinnacle of his powers, but he hadn't bargained for the fact that he was waging war against the God of Israel. The God of Israel. By waging war against Israel, the God of Israel would wage war against him. Nor had he bargained for the covenant made with a man whose name he bore, and that covenant had, according to that covenant, what he had done and planned for Israel would be done to him. He did not consider he had touched the apple of God's eye, Israel. He had committed the act of blasphemy, and then he was gone. And so he joined a long list of fallen tyrants, evildoers, anti-Semites, blasphemers, assorted monsters of history who learned the hard way that the God of the universe also happens to be the God of Israel. And the God of Israel happens also to be the Almighty. What does all this tell us? Though the world is unaware, the course of history is ultimately determined not by what we see, but by what we don't. There's another realm and other agents moving beyond the events of our time, moving behind them. Behind October 7th were the militants and terrorists of Gaza. Behind the militants and terrorists of Gaza was Hamas. But behind Hamas was Iran. Behind Iran was the Tsar Paras. Behind the Tsar Paras was the dragon. But behind Israel was the Tsar Yisrael, Michael. And behind the Tsar Yisrael, Michael, is the Messiah. And behind all things is God. It all began with the dragon's strike on that October Sabbath. It would all end ultimately in the book of Revelation. Okay, some uncensored information. Now, I mentioned about Russia. Okay, there's a mystery here. There are two sides. There are those who say, when they hear Ezekiel 38 and 39, say, okay, there it is. It says Russia. There are others who say, no, it's not Russia. It can't be Russia. Russia has nothing to do with it. Well, here's the thing. The truth is kind of different. And that is this. On one hand, those who said that Rosh in the Hebrew means Russia, no, that's not true. Or Meshech is Meshki linked to Moscow, that's not the case either. Or Tubal is linked to Tobolsk, that's not the case either. However, at the same time, you can't rule out Russia because it says head of nations. Russia is a very important head of nations in the world, key in that. It says to the uttermost north, the actual uttermost north would be Russia. And at the same time, even though the nations at the time of Ezekiel are Asia Minor, that's the land, that's Turkey, the thing is, it's right next to the Russian lands. I mean, it's so close. It's at the Black Sea, and you have Georgia right next to it. You have Ukraine right next to it. Russia is a Slavic nation. The Proto-Slavic peoples, one of the sources for the Slavic peoples is right that area. So that was 2,500 years ago, and there was a lot of migration and all these things. So you cannot rule out Russia. And the interesting thing is that Russia has been linked to Israel in really prophetic ways. Russia, it was the persecution of the Tsar of Russia that began the birth of Israel. In 1948, it was Russia that actually voted for Israel for different motives that caused it to come back. Russia actually supplied Czechoslovakia arms to Israel. At the same time, Russia became an archenemy of Israel in the Cold War and was actually fueling anti-Semitism throughout the world. In 1967, this is the behind the scenes of history, Russia actually triggered the Six-Day War by telling the Arabs that Israel was going to attack them. So it actually was used in prophecy. It actually fulfilled prophecy. And Russia was also part of the Yom Kippur War as well. And when the Soviet Union fell, it led to a mass immigration of Jewish people from Russia to Israel. All right, now let me answer some questions, since this is uncensored, that people always want to know from me. A few things. First of all, it says, this generation shall not pass away. Okay, what does that mean? Does it mean, some people used to think it was going to be, that means one generation from 1948, that's 1988, or it's going to be that will still be alive, those who were born in 1948. You have to be careful because a few things. One is, what's start point? Does it say there it's starting from 1948, the birth of Israel? Could it be 1967, the return of Jerusalem, or something else? And at the same time, the word is Genea, which could be generation. It could also mean this people or this race will not pass away. It could also be the Jewish people. So you have to be cautious. Be aware we are in the end times. We're watching things happen, accelerating, but still be careful. All right, we may touch on the next one, the Antichrist, and a mystery behind from the Temple Mount. Some people think that the Antichrist will be Jewish. I don't believe that, because the Antichrist was basically, he's going to make a deal with the Jewish people. He's going to attack the Jewish people. He's represented by a horn or a beast, which is always spoken of a Gentile world kingdom. So I'd be careful. I'm still not dogmatic either way, but he's going to lead the world against the Jewish people. And the foreshadow of the Antichrist in the Bible is a man named Antiochus, who performed an abomination desolation in ancient times. There's going to be another. He was definitely Gentile. He sought to destroy the Jewish people. And the other thing is, in Daniel, it says the people of the prince who will come will destroy the city, Jerusalem. Who destroyed the city? The Roman Empire, the Roman people in 70 AD. It says the Romans are the people of the prince who is going to come. So therefore, it would lead that somehow he's linked to Rome. So now people say, well, could the Antichrist be in the world right now? Well, he could be. It depends on when Messiah comes. He's going to be alive at that time. So some people think he'll be around 30 years as Messiah was. That means he would be born 30 years before that time. Or the other possibility is that he could be around 60. 3 is linked to God, 6 is linked to 666, and therefore, he would be born at another time. So now, what about the two witnesses? Another question that could be asked of me that people ask. Some people think it's Moses and Elijah because they were there at the Transfiguration. Others think it was Elijah and Enoch because we don't know that they died, but they could just be two people who are born who are prophets at the same time. So remember, the other thing is the Antichrist, the spirit of the Antichrist is already in the world, already at work. So there has to be a turning away from Messiah for there to be a turning to the anti-Messiah. And we are watching that right now. The apostasy is actually leading the way for an Antichrist civilization, an Antichrist to come. To turn to the Antichrist, you have to turn away from the Christ or the Messiah. We're watching it every day. We're getting closer every day. Now, we're going on, and if I have time, I'm going to say some things about the Antichrist, maybe Armageddon, but we're going to get into a whole hidden realm, the secret on the Mount.
To find out how you can receive more of Jonathan's